ma 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 ha ma 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 oh you do tere ya no ma ma mo no yo tere ya ma ma no ma ma mo no yo tere yo mama, ha mama mama, oh you do nachamo, tere ya no, mama mama, oh yo, tere ya no.
Welcome to the teachings of the Baal Shemtov class, and we'll get right to it because it's already past the appointed time. So this particular teaching is a teaching that gives us a different way in being present, and let me just share with you what that means. The Baal Shemtov, the holy Baal Shemtov, whose teachings that we hope to learn together every Wednesday. The teachings of Baal Shemtov tell us that wherever your mind is, that's where you are. It's interesting, by divine providence, which is another, of course, teaching that's a principle of the teachings of the Baal Shemtov, in that everything in our existence is a living organism created by the Creator and living right now in real time. And in that respect, that the way in which we're present wherever our mind is. So by divine providence, I saw before a picture of Zuckerberg in the metaverse taking a selfie with some others, obviously when they're not together. But in the picture, obviously, it looks like they are together. And that's the idea, is that wherever your mind is, that's where you are. So in their minds, that's where they were. They were taking a selfie together. So the truth is that when we consider what this means, it's very deep. It goes very broad in many directions. And that's because at any given moment, the way that we're perceiving, including the way right now, you're either listening to this or watching this, the reality is that that's the way that it works, is that wherever, in which way our minds are, that's the way we listen to things. And when we take this truth into consideration, which is very easy to take into consideration because it's something that simply makes sense, then we then could already become more of a master in what exactly should our perspective be. And I will tell you right now a great story, actually a book called The Essence of Success or something like that. I forget I'm pretty sure that's what the book was. Anyway, where this fellow comes to a city, and he's at the entrance of a city, and he sees a person sitting out there, an elderly person. He says, "Hi, how are you? I'm looking for this in the city." He says, "Yeah, it's right here." He says, "What do you know about it?" He says, "What do you want to know about it?" He says, he says, "I want to know what kind of people are there." He says, "What kind of people are you expecting to see?" He said, "I don't know. I heard there were some pretty negative people. There's people that they cheat from each other and they're not friendly to each other and blah, blah, blah." So he said, "That's exactly what you're going to find." And then the next person comes by and also comes the same person, asks him in the city. He asks him, "What kind of people are there?" He said, "What kind of people are you expecting to see?" He said, "I've heard, actually, I traveled all the way here because I've heard people are really there for each other in a way that's really deep. And it's not, it's not just, for show. It's like something that's very sincere. And they're there for each other when they give birth, and they're there for each other when they get sick, et cetera, et cetera." So he said, "That's exactly the type of people you're going to find." And I love that story because it's so aligned with that which comes right long before it, with that teaching of you are where your mind is. So where is our mind at any given time? What are we thinking? How are we thinking? In which way are we processing what it is? I will tell you, the natural way of the mind is that it's being governed by the way we feel about things in our primal self. In other words, each one of us have a nature in which we have come into this world. a good way that is explained in a way that's kind of somewhat, even though it's very deep and intense, but it's also somewhat interestingly humorous in some twisted way. But anyway, human beings are similar to like the fact that, like you say, animals. Okay, so they're animals, but there's so many types of animals. Well, there's so many types of humans. So just like they actually in Kabbalah, that's the thing that's interesting, is that in Kabbalah, the human the human beings are compared. If you look at the facial features of human beings, there's a whole list of different animals which human beings are compared to. And actually, interestingly enough, the way in which we are aligned with in the Kabbalistic would tell us more about, and does tell us more about, our primal self. So there's lions, there's deer, there are sheep, there are oxes, there's all different types, right? And like just like there are different types of animals, there are all different types of human beings. So the way that we're present, if we don't do anything about it, will be very much the distinction between the way animals are present when we come around them. And every one of them is different, because depending on the instinctive nature of the animal, that will determine the natural response and reaction from that animal. So I'm simplifying it, but much more has to do also with the experiences, and especially the traumas that we've had in our life from the time that we're young until the present day, very much govern the narrative of our minds. That's just the way that it works. So if you think about it, it just makes sense. And I'll tell you, to the degree where it governs the narrative of our minds, is that unless we do anything about it, the usual is we don't hear what's being said when we hear words, but rather we hear it through the filter of our story. Think about that. So if we have certain triggers about certain things, like I love my younger brother Tzemach of blessed memory, and because he was the youngest boy of the six of us, of the boys, he always, and rightfully so, felt like, okay, Tzemach, you do it. Okay, Tzemach, you do it, And of course, that was how we were in some degree when we were kids. What we grew up, that all changed. But even then, jokingly, Tzemach would often say to me here and there, he'd say something, he would put it in there. But he would acknowledge it was just like, he's just having flashbacks, because of course we all changed, and hopefully, So the point is that our experiences in life are all accumulating to create the narrative that's running in our mind. But is that narrative the one that you should be choosing to run in your mind? Now, hear me. Animals can't choose a different narrative, but we could. So that's profound about us. The Rebbe, in a conversation that I read this morning about a chess game with a chess master, compares the angels to those pieces on the puzzle that are able to do leaps and bounds, but are limited to a specific area, specific mission, But then there's the pawn. The pawn could only move one step at a time, but eventually could transform into a queen. So that's who we are. We're not as profound as those other creatures, but we have that ability of transformation that no other creature has. And where does that transformation begin? It begins by replacing the narrative that is currently running the mind by simply asking the question in a truthful way, is that really what happened? Think about that. Just try that out for size. Try that out for size. God willing, going forward, when you hear something and you react a certain way, just take a pause and ask yourself, is that really what happened? Or maybe something else happened. And you'll be surprised how often you'll have a different story after you ask that question. And that's just the beginning of it, okay? So what we're going to learn about is a particular teaching of the Baal Shemtov that also gets us present to a higher way of being present in our minds. And this requires really exercise. So you'll learn the actual teaching in this session, but my suggestion is that it's something that perhaps listen to again. I'll attempt from here forth to stick to the translation of the teaching and to really listen to it again and to consider taking on the exercise again and again and again and again. Here we go. So the Baal Shemtov talks about the fact that in the Jewish hierarchy, we have the Kohens at the high. They're the ones that serve God through the services of the temple. There's the Levites, which are the ones that do the singing. The Kohens represent the right side, the aspect, the characteristic of love. The Levites represent the left side. And the reality is, as the Baal Shemtov describes it, is that actually everything that comes into the flow of existence is from these two channels. In other words, because of the divine love, there's a flow of force of energy coming in to give life to the creation that we're in. And through the system of tzimtzum, which is contraction, which is where that flow of divine light, which is infinite, is contracted in order so that the world that we know should be able to exist. And it is that very light that is contracted that descends from a very high level to take residence in this very low world. But, and in this, and what that simply means is that everything you're looking at in this universe, everything you can imagine is all a projection from the infinite or beyond, the creator of this universe, which has no description. But in order for it to exist the way that it exists, the creator takes certain steps to hide the divine truth within things in order for us to be able to have the choice that we do. So that restriction of the light, the tzimtzum, that's all part of the left side. So now, when it comes to the first tzimtzum, when it comes to the first contraction of the infinite light, it was because of the divine love to create the existence that we have right now. And that means that that love is vested even and alive even and infinite even as the tzimtzum exists. And that is for the eventuality of the souls of Israel that will bring about the divine revelation that all human beings will together experience. So that ultimate desire, that desire of that ultimate vision was the one that drives and drove and the idea of the tzimtzum, the contraction of the light. And through that, all the worlds and all the universes and all the spiritual and physical universe has been created. And without this system, if there would have been a complete blockage of that light that's profound that we're describing, that's connected to the original desire of the maker of the world, it would have been impossible to reveal divine matter in the physical world. And of course, if not for that divine, essential, profound spark that exists even here on physical planet Earth, and of course in all levels, of course, the worlds would not be in existence. But the point of the contraction rather is in order that the world should be able to experience, albeit a very contracted experience of, but an awareness of the divine, the creator, the maker of the universe. Now, even though in the original formation of this system, the love and the contraction all emerged as one at once. Nevertheless, in the physical world, and this is where we come into play, we must, in order to attach and being connected to that spark, we must make two particular vessels for it. Because this is the way it is within the worlds, that all of the existence of the higher spiritual realms are in a very intense state of oneness. And only in the lower realms, specifically in our world, does it come across as if there's multiplicity taking place in the world to some degree. And that's because of the way that the vessels work in the system that we're talking about. But from the perspective of the divine flow of energy, the same oneness that there is in the highest form of the divine projection, where the distinction of things and matter are not taken into account because of the overwhelming experience of the oneness of Hashem. So that is still here to some degree, but from the perspective of the energy, not to some degree, from the perspective of the energy, it's here 100%, even though it's occurring in a way where there's you and there's me, there's your opinion, there's my opinion, there's this person's opinion, that person's opinion, there's the distinctions that could come across as if there's a bunch of separation taking place. But the truth is, at the energetic level, it's not true, as we all can observe. And we can therefore attach to it, at least at our mind level. And that's where the meditation that we're talking about takes place. Number one, starting at thought. So in the highest truth, everything that's occurring is part of the projection that's in real time being decided by the maker of the universe because of multiple different reasons that one could study about some of the reasons and at least be aware of the others. But when we're out of alignment with that thought process of oneness of Hashem, then we're out of alignment with divine providence. So when something happens, we react to it as if there's separate forces taking place, which produces anger, for example, or produces other characteristics that would be inconsistent with the belief of knowing that God is 100% involved in whatever is taking place right now. Don't ever forget that. So, number one, even though the world has a narrative in which that's the primary one, but we could choose to acknowledge the oneness of God within the experiences that we have. And as a result of that, we can, starting with our mind, be present to the oneness of that. And the same is also true in our sound and speech. Sound and speech have multiple different formulas of how and different ways in which they occur. But we could take that and again, through the acknowledgement of the supreme oneness that is occurring at this given moment, speak and sound from there, meaning that's where we're coming from. And then the same is also true in our behavior, which is more difficult, but that is to be able to see the behaviors that we're doing and unify them where, how does this look like? Is it aligned with that oneness and unity that is meant to be present even in the physical level? Once a person who's intelligent, oh, by the way, what he says is a wise person never does or takes any action that even in the physical that denotes a form of separation. That's what really means, a chacham, somebody who's tuned into this. There's an interesting, I'm just wondering like what kind of story, there are times that a person, halacha, Torah would tell us to take one thing, to do one thing. But a person, like for example, being open and having a store open on Shabbat. So it's for some industries, it's very difficult. And there are some people that try to make loopholes and this and that, etc. Right? So the same God that told us to keep closed on Shabbat is really the one that's sending the customers, right? So when we acknowledge the oneness of God, then we don't have that conflict. But when we're not 100% in or committed to that truth, then there's a form of conflict in the behavioral part of, in that level of behavioral part. So the point is that the meditation is to be able to be present to the fact that divine providence means that whatever is happening at any given second, one could just take a bird's eye view and just realize that you're in the midst of a plan of a Hashem. I'm in the midst, we're in the midst, etc. And what is in which way am I meant to be present at this moment? And that will often change, or very often change, the way that we respond. And in fact, like I've heard it said from others, that's the way we respond to events and occurrences. It just changes our response. Instead of reacting from the natural way in which we're present, each one of us differently from another, we respond to it with applying the intelligence. As the Baal Shemtov continues to teach, that once a person sees that his entire existence, his entire energy, even as it occurs in the most physical, mundane way, is all a product of something that's in real time coming from above, that the truth is, if not for that flow of energy, this existence in which we are occurring would be non-existent. The moment one allows this to penetrate their mind's eye, so to speak, and their thought, that a person is connected to the higher realms. And just like in the higher realms, everything is in a state of true oneness and simple oneness. And therefore, if a person truly is in this state of, and present in the state of mind, in the awe of this truth, which is demonstrated by the fact that the person is not paying attention to those vessels that would be considered separated, but instead a person pays attention to to the higher level, which is where they're still unified. Speech level is where the first level. And through doing this, a person then makes a connection between the lower world in which we are occurring and the highest world. And in truly exercising this, one could ascend from one level to the next level, to the very height of it all. And what is the height of it all? That's when it's 100% one. And just to share a story that would be apropos, is that Reb Zusha from Anapala, who is one of my ancestors, one time he was walking and some kid tripped him, and the kid felt terrible. And long story short, the Reb Zusha was laughing and accepted it, but this whole point is he was so in oneness with the fact that nothing could occur in the physical world if not for the fact that it's determined by a much higher narrative that's making it be present here. He was so attached to that he reacted and responded so completely different than anyone else would. Anyway, thank you for joining, and please, any questions, you can email me, rabbi@jewishmalibu.com. You can check out our other information at #DP frequency. Thanks for joining.